Oh, well, I mean, my parents certainly wanted me to grow up as a Sri Lankan living in America. I mean, we eventually, when I was a teenager, we would have fights where I would say, I'm an American, and they'd say, no, you're Sri Lankan. So, I think I was certainly, we had rice and curry for dinner every night, and I was certainly, very aware that my parents had an arranged marriage. They were very traditional, and my mom wore saris for special events, and I wasn't allowed to do some of the things that my American classmates could do. When I was young, I couldn't go to school dances or have sleepovers at friends' houses, that kind of thing. So I was born in 1971. My dad's a doctor. He and my mother and I moved to the United States in 1973. We actually arrived on Christmas Day in 1973, and I think we originally moved to New Jersey, and we lived there for a year, none of which I remember. And then we moved to Connecticut. He got a job at New Britain General Hospital and has been working there and living there ever since. They live in New Britain, and when I was 5, my sister was born, my sister Myrna, and then 3 years later, our youngest sister Sharmila was born. Well, I think, I have some Sri Lankan friends whose parents came and really integrated, became best friends with the neighbors and all of that, and my family didn't do that so much. My dad has very good friends among his work colleagues. My mother's friendships, I think, have always been primarily among the Sri Lankan and Indian community in Connecticut, which has gotten bigger and bigger over time. Also her sisters, she's the oldest of 9, and so she came over, and soon after, my aunt came over and settled in Chicago, and so they spent a lot of time on the phone. And then after the war in 1983, most of my other aunts came over as refugees, and married here and settled here. My partner is Kevin White. He's a mathematician. We have 2 children. Our daughter is Kaviata C. White. She is almost 4 years old. She'll be 4 in May. And our son is Anandan White, and he's 1.5 now. He'll be 2 in September. I was an English major. I always loved books. When I was finishing high school, I planned to major in English. I chose my university based on which ones had a strong English program. I went to the University of Chicago. I didn't plan to be a writer. I thought I would be an English professor and academic, and so, but when I got to the end of my degree, I realized that I just hadn't planned it out. I'd just been enjoying classes and not thinking about it very much, and suddenly it was time to do whatever the next thing was. So I very quickly applied to PhD programs in Lit, and I only applied to the very top programs in the country, and I didn't get into any of them. And then I had no idea what to do with myself. So I became a secretary, and I was working at the university because I had to pay rent somehow. So I got a job at the university, and then after a year of that, I followed my boyfriend, Kevin, to Philadelphia. He was a grad student, and his advisor had transferred to UPenn. So we ended up moving. While I was there working on as a secretary, I had been writing fiction kind of for fun, and started thinking, and I would do it at I had all these temp secretarial jobs where I'd be sitting there with a computer for hours, and I wasn't allowed to read because it would look like I wasn't working, and often there wasn't a lot of work to do. So I was really bored, and I started writing first poetry, and then eventually stories. And at some point I said, well, if I enjoy doing this and I do it for fun, maybe I should try to make a living at it. So I ended up doing an MFA at Mills College, and then later a PhD in creative writing at the University of Utah. And so I was talking in the journal about how I'd like to have a book, and maybe I would try just self-publishing it and putting some pieces together. And one of my readers wrote to me and said, hey, my name's Dale Larson. I have a publishing company. We publish computer manuals. I would love to publish your book. His company did computer manuals for the Amiga, I think it was. And So, and he got me together with one of the other online journalers, was this woman, and I'm going to forget her last name, Tracy Lee, and was a photographer, really. And we did a collaborative book that he put out. I think he printed about 5,000 copies and sold a good number of them. So, and yeah, it was very exciting. It's a very skinny book. I look at it now and I'm like, wow, I could write all the stuff in here in like a week now. So, but at the time it took me years to put it together. So I wrote much slower back then. And it gave me confidence in some ways, maybe too much confidence. You know, I think I went into my MFA program probably most of the people in my program probably hadn't published much yet, and certainly didn't have a book. And so I remember I was reading some evaluation from my advisor, and she says, Marianne thinks she's better than she is, essentially. I mean, and you know, she said it more nicely than that, but kind of like she's reaching for a claim that she has not yet won, you know, and sort of it was humbling and a good reminder that I had to keep working. At first, when and actually it took me years to even realize that almost all the stories I wrote when I started out had white people as the main characters. Really, for years. There's one the second story I wrote, Season of Marriage, is actually has South Asian characters, but in the original draft they were Indian. Like, it didn't even occur to me to make them Sri Lankan, which I think is kind of funny. And yeah, it probably took me maybe 10 years into writing before I started explicitly writing about Sri Lankans in Sri Lanka. I was supposed to go actually for a trip on my own in '83 when I would have been 12, in actually July of '83. And my father got a telegram just before I was supposed to leave saying, "Trouble's coming, don't send her." So he canceled my flight and I stayed home, and then then everything fell apart. None of the rest of my family, I think, has been back since then. I went back in 2005 during the ceasefire. I was there for a month. I think my grandmother's house was firebombed, if I remember right. His mother's house, and there was a story about her taking refuge in a convent during the '83, sometime in '83, I think, and mostly I think my family was affected by leaving. I would like to go back. I mean, I would have loved to go back much sooner, but since I have two small children now, it's a little trickier. I'm hoping not this summer, but possibly next summer, to take some of my students on a study abroad trip. And I'm going to be applying for a Fulbright. I gather it's very competitive to get one to Sri Lanka, so I may end up applying for India and then trying to travel down to Sri Lanka as part of that. So.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.